Chief Wray will make some statements, then take a few questions, but I think everybody understands this is still an ongoing investigation, so we probably won't be able to answer all of the questions today. So, Chief, you're all set?
Sure. I apologize for reading, but there's a great deal of information I'd like to cover. So I will read the statement and then open it up for questions. So first, this is clearly a case where many of us are struggling. We're struggling to understand. Paul Heenan, the man who was shot, his family is struggling. The neighborhood Paul lived in is struggling. Our police department is struggling. And yes, finally, the entire community is struggling with this particular case. I'm calling this press conference to do three things. One is to clarify the timeline. Two is to clarify some questions that are sitting out there in the community that there may be some confusion on. And then three, to talk about next steps. Our goal in any investigation is to get to the truth and to provide accurate information. What was reasonable and what was reasonable on the part of an officer under similar circumstances? Let me first say, I have not reached any conclusions. Fact-finding is still ongoing, but I want to be open and honest about what we're learning. It is important to note that the DA's staff did come out to the scene of the incident early Friday, and the Dane County Sheriff's Office has been shadowing this investigation. So let me start with the chronological order. Last Friday morning, around 2:45 a.m., officers were dispatched to a home in the 500 block of South Baldwin Street. The call was for a possible burglary in progress, and that the caller could hear someone in the house. Officers were told that the caller was a woman, that she was with 4 children, and that her husband had gone downstairs to investigate. The first officer on the scene, Officer Steve Himesnes, got out of his squad car and walked toward the home from which the woman had placed the call. It was a very dark street, but as he walked up, he could see 2 men grappling and struggling. Based on the description of the husband provided by dispatch, he believed he was seeing the homeowner struggling with a possible burglar. It was at this point that Officer Himesnes pulled out his service weapon. He radioed to dispatch about what he was seeing and ordered the 2 men down. He ordered them to get down. At this time, Paul Heenan disengaged with the homeowner and focused his attention on Officer Himesnes. The husband moved away with his hands in the air as Mr. Heenan moved towards Officer Himesnes. Officer Himesnes began to back up, but Mr. Heenan swore at the officer and quickly closed the distance of approximately 15 to 20 feet. Officer Himesnes said Mr. Heenan grabbed him latching onto his left hand with one hand while using the other to reach Officer Himesnes' gun. Officer Himesnes believed his life was in danger and fired 3 rounds. A second officer, Officer Stacy Twombly, had gotten out of her squad at the opposite end of the block and began running towards Officer Himesnes and Mr. Heenan. As she could see, they were both in a physical confrontation. As soon as she heard the shots, she went to Mr. Heenan and began providing life-saving aid. All of this happened very fast, just as a matter of seconds between Officer Himesnes, a matter of seconds when Officer Himesnes told all of this happened very fast, just as a matter of seconds between Officer Himesnes told Mr. Heenan to get down when the shots were fired. Although this case was called a burglary although this case was called in as a burglary in progress, it turns out that Mr. Heenan was not a burglar, but someone who had recently moved into the neighborhood and had entered the wrong address. He did have a knife in his pocket, but he did not display it during the struggle with the homeowner or with the officer. Now I'd like to emphasize a couple of points in case they were not clear in terms of what we've been hearing questions about, emphasize and clarify. First of all, we did respond to a complaint of a burglary in progress. But that was not what the incident turned out to be. Number two, our investigation revealed that Mr. Heenan was not armed. He did have a pocket knife, but that was not a factor in this investigation. From all accounts, there was a struggle between Mr. Heenan and Mr. O'Malley, and there was also a struggle that took place between Officer Heimsness and Mr. Heenan. And number four, Officer Heimsness' service weapon was taken out at the time that he arrived on the scene and observed the struggle between the homeowner, Mr. O'Malley, and the burglary suspect at that time, Mr. Heenan. Talk a bit about next steps. This investigation is not complete. We're still in the process of completing this investigation. The investigation, as in any process like this, will be forwarded to the district attorney sometime midweek. We expect that the DA will be able to decide on this shortly, as they have been plugged into this investigation in terms of providing them information as time moves on. We will also initiate an internal investigation that will focus on determining if department policy, procedure, and training was followed. Lastly, there are a number of community meetings that are being discussed and planned. The Madison Police Department would be happy to take part in those meetings. That concludes my prepared statements, and I'll be ready to answer any questions.
Chief, you said that you haven't reached any conclusions about this case yet, but given what you have laid out, a scenario in which an officer arrives at the scene, sees a struggle, given the information that was called in by dispatch, an individual approaches him in what appears to be an aggressive manner, swears that the officer reaches for his gun.
Sure.
Does your training and policy and procedure say that lethal force is justified in a situation like that?
Sure. I have reached some conclusions. I want to clarify that in terms of what I have been briefed on and what I know about the case. For me, talking with the investigators and what I know about the case, the struggle that took place between Officer Heimsness and Mr. Heenan, I think did produce a deadly force situation. In my mind, after reviewing the information that I have, I can't go much further than that because we're still reviewing details of this case. But I think anytime you get a citizen in close proximity to a police officer and their weapon is there, and the weapon becomes part of the issue in that close proximity, and it's an aggressive move, I think it does produce a deadly force situation. I can't go much further than that on this.
Chief, does video confirm this timeline and this struggle that you're talking about, or is this just based on statements from officers who were there?
Yeah, I am not aware of any video at this particular time. Most of this is based upon officer statements, both Officer Twombly, Officer Heimsness, as well as the homeowner. Oh, and dispatch, yeah.
So the homeowner is also saying that there was a struggle between Heenan and your officer?
Yes.
What is the protocol when a police officer approaches a situation like that in terms of identifying themselves or whether or not they are armed?
A police officer is not required to say, no, I am armed. But what we ask them to do in training is to make sure that their command presence and that they are verbalizing what they're doing very clear. That is clearly what took place in this particular incident. There were several commands to get down, several commands, and that is that is one of the issues that is not in dispute. That Officer Heimsness did give commands. It was heard by the other officer as well as the homeowner, and that is not in dispute.
Has there been any toxicology on the victim in terms of his sobriety or whether he was drunk or under the influence of?
There was toxicology taken. I don't believe we have the results of that as of yet. No.
when you talk about policy and procedure, for an officer going into a situation like this, you mentioned he pulled his service weapon. Is there any policy or procedure dealing with using other force, as in a taser or something like that, instead of pulling the service weapon? Sure.
Let me do this, because I anticipated a number of questions relating to training, policy and procedure, the use of force. And so I asked a training officer who deals with these issues on a daily basis to be here. But let me say this. At the time that Officer Hines arrives on the scene, he has a burglar in process in his mind based upon the information that he's receiving from the dispatcher. That is a high-risk felony call. That is also, he also observes what he believes is a struggle with the homeowner and the burglary suspect. I think as I started this conversation off, it is reasonable, objectively reasonable, for Officer Hines to have pulled out his service weapon at that particular time. So I'm going to turn it over to the training officer, see if there's anything else to add on this.
This is Kimba 2.
Kimba 2.
Kimba, can you maybe bring your chair over so that you can sit here?
And if there's nothing else, if I was very clear, Kimba, you don't have to worry about it.
No, I think it's well put, but could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, just to
Yeah, I guess
clarify.
my question is, when an officer is going into a situation like this, what's the training or the policies and procedures dealing with going for a service weapon versus possibly a taser or something less lethal?
Okay. Again, the call in question was that of a burglary, so again, a high-risk situation, very unpredictable. So as far as the training is concerned, we teach our officers that the training is consistent with what he did. As far as his actions were appropriate and commensurate with the type of call he was responding to. And that's, again, one of the things that we would look at in terms of that response. So certainly appropriate and within training to arm themselves, have that service weapon out in response to a burglar or burglary type call.
I'll just throw in a quick something that took place today as well. I put up a news release that you can see online where we had a burglary last night where we caught a burglary suspect, and again the officer did pull out his service weapon in the course of arresting that burglary suspect, and the burglary suspect did comply with the officer in that case and also had a knife in his pocket and had actually committed a burglary. This was a burglar. So the situation is somewhat the same in that that's what the officer was responding to as a burglary call.
What other equipment are officers provided with? You know, what other equipment do they have when they're out there?
As far as the issued equipment, handcuffs, the firearm or the service weapon, by policy they are required to have a baton accessible to them, so an impact weapon, and also a chemical spray, usually OC or oleoresin capsicum is what is required by policy that they have.
Many of them have tasers?
Yes, certainly a large percentage of our patrol officers, those assigned to the patrol service, are taser trained. But again, just to be clear, by training and even by our policy, the taser is not a substitute for deadly force. And where deadly force, or the potential for deadly force exists, again, the training, the consistency of the training is that they would arm themselves with their firearm first, and only, again, if we see, in light of new information, what new observations, for example, could we maybe consider transitioning to a taser, provided we have additional lethal coverage in in dealing with an armed subject or the potentially armed subject.
We had heard some people say that they had thought they heard people yelling, "He's our neighbor, neighbor, neighbor." Has that come out in any of the investigation that there were people yelling that it was a neighbor?
Yeah, that a statement similar to that, I have heard as part of the investigation. In terms of the accounts of what was actually said, they're different accounts, but something similar to that was indicated in the investigation.
Chief, you said Mr. Heenan tried to reach, or what the officer thought was reaching for his weapon. Was that witnessed, or is that an account from Officer Hines? Did the officer say it, or did other people see that happen? Right.
The statement that I gave you was an account from Officer Hines, but that is not the only account where someone is discussing that. So Officer Hines is not the only one that makes a statement similar to that.
In other words, witnesses are backing that up.
Yes.
And the neighbor?
Yes. and I, want to be in total candor in terms of the investigation. The neighbor is contacted twice, and on one account, it's not as clear that that's what he's saying. On another account, he's more clear that he actually observed Paul Heenan going for the officer's service weapon.
Take a couple more questions.
Is there any indication, you're describing a scenario in which this man clearly went to the wrong house.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any information indicating why he, then was struggling with the homeowner, or why he acted in the way he did with regard to the officer?
Yeah, there are a number of reports that the homeowner was intoxicated. And I'm sorry, I apologize. That Mr. Heenan was intoxicated. There were a number of reports that he was intoxicated. If you look at the behavior, and we're in the process of confirming that. We want to confirm not just upon the statements there, but we would like to confirm that. But if you look at what has taken place here, we had a person that went to the wrong home. I mean, that's not something that, if you just live a couple of houses down, that you would typically do. If you see your neighbor, and once it's identified that that's your neighbor, and your neighbor is trying to assist you to get back home, which it happened in this particular case, and then there is a struggle between you and your neighbor, that is generally not something that you would expect from someone that is under sound mind. And then lastly, which I think is a very important point, when you have a uniformed officer that is armed and commanding you to get down, generally most people within the public will comply with those instructions and do it. So I think there is some reason to believe here that there was something on board. I just cannot confirm that at this time.
Chief, when you look at Officer Heimsman's history, that he did have 2 events that were in fact looked at, do you stand by the decision that he was on the street and in patrols at this point in time, that what's done is done and those investigations reveal accurate information?
Sure. There was one incident that you're referring to a couple of years ago, the vehicle incident, which has been reported in the media. Then there's the other incident at the Rod House. On one occasion, I believe he was suspended for 15 days. On the other occasion, the investigation revealed that it was not sustained, but I want to be really clear about that. Not sustained does not mean exonerated, which is a different thing. And as you have read that report, there were some statements on both sides. It was a difficult investigation in itself, but that is what the department concluded in those. I stand behind those investigations as chief of police, but we do have an ongoing investigation now, both completing ours, getting it to the district attorney. The district attorney still has to look at this case from, is there any criminal liability sitting out there? I still have to look at this case from the standpoint of were there policies violated, were there procedures that were not followed, and was there training not followed? And I will make my decisions when that is complete. I mean, so you take these on a case-by-case basis.
You mentioned that the Dane County Sheriff's Department is shadowing this.
Mm-hmm.
Will they have any role? Will they be submitting any kind of report of their own?
Yeah, what we have been doing in the last 2 to 3 years as law enforcement, kind of as a check and balance, because our internal affairs and our lieutenants have been shadowing a number of the investigations that have taken place, shooting incidents, officer-involved shooting incidents with other law enforcement, in particular Dane County Sheriff. And so what we'd like to do is provide a check and balance. Now, they will not be providing a report, but it is important to have another set of eyes on an investigation of this magnitude when use of force is used and the public has, and rightfully so, would have a lot of questions.
Chief, what percentage of officers would you say have been suspended at one point in their career for a period of like 15 days, as was the case with Officer Heimsman, and are still working within the department on IPP?
I can't speak for Chief David Cooper or Chief Williams, but what I can say is that if you are within that 15 to 30 day window and I issue a suspension, you are right butting up to where I'm going to be looking at termination. So if that gives you a frame of reference.
That wasn't under your watch.
Yeah. And in fact, the 15-day suspension with Officer Hymens was actually under Chief Williams.
Chief, I know the information that we had received from police via the 911 center was that Paul Heenan was actually in the house. Did he actually enter the house? And if so, was the house unlocked? How did he get in? And did the homeowner know Paul before this and recognize him?
I can answer a couple of those, and I'll turn to some of the investigators.
I think the situation was that there was actually a key in the door, so he was able to get into the threshold of the house because there was a key in the door. And what the officer knows is that the wife has called in and has said her husband's going downstairs. He gets down there, and I let the chief pick it up from there. But the word never gets back to the officer. The officer only knows possible burglary in progress, someone's in the house.
Yeah. And when they contact each other, the contact took place by the homeowner and Paul Heenan just by the door, right by the door, and they contact him, if that is correct. And then they start talking. There's a discussion where the homeowner recognizes him as the neighbor, and then that discussion about, you're my neighbor, and then he has this discussion about helping him get back to his home.
So when the officer arrived, was the homeowner actually helping Mr. Heenan back to his home?
When the officer arrives, he is observing what he believes is a struggle between the homeowner and Paul Heenan.
I did check with one of our lead investigators. It appears Heenan did get into the house, but not very far.
Okay.
So just into the, I want to say the threshold. I don't know the home myself, but he had opened the door. He had gotten in. It's not like he's in the kitchen, the living room, something like that, but he had entered the house, is what I'm getting from
And
the
was
officer.
the key left? I'm sorry, a quick follow-up. Was the key accidentally left in the door, or did the homeowners routinely leave a key in their door?
I'm going to answer this question this way. It was there for security and safety's sake of the homeowner. I'm not going to get into their habits in terms of what they do, in terms of what they do with their key. Does that make sense?
Not really.
Okay.
I can talk to
Yeah, okay.
I can talk to
Yeah.
Was the officer given any additional training after the 2001 suspension and then after the 2006 investigation?
I believe he was given additional training after the first one of the 15-day suspension. I have not checked in terms of after the latest one.
I can certainly get that information later too.
And Chief, did the homeowner report a struggle with Heenan, or just the struggle with the police officer?
Let me come back. I just want to clarify this one. I'll just go ahead and say it was, as reported to us, a common practice to leave the key in the door.
Okay.
By the homeowner.
Outside door?
Yes, by the homeowner. And I hate to get into those kind, because I don't know if they're going to continue it, and I don't want to set themselves up for that. That's why I was a little leery about that. I'm sorry, you had
Go ahead.
Yeah, about the homeowner, did he report a struggle with Heenan, or did he just report a struggle between Heenan and the police officer? The homeowner's comments to officers, investigating officers, is that there was a struggle between Heenan and itself, as well as, that was consistent, as well as a struggle between the officer and Heenan. So on both occasions, he supported those statements. Yeah.
Did the neighbor specifically say that, or give a reason as to why they were struggling?
Yeah, let me also add that the homeowner also had some injuries on his arm to support the fact that there was the struggle. The homeowner was attempting to help Paul get back to his house. There was one point in time during a discussion, some words were exchanged, and then Paul seemed to get really upset, very upset.
And then that's when the struggle in terms of pushing the homeowner back in the direction of his original home. So.
And that's about the time the officer showed up.
Mhm.
So that was the struggle, like what was the nature of the struggle? Pushing him or punching?
They're kind of latched onto each other
Like that,
and
like that.
grappling like that.
You know, it's like the arms going, you know, like that.
So I just want to be really clear. You're saying that at the moment the officer fired, Heenan had actually managed to grab him with one hand?
That is correct. At the time that and this is a statement by, you know, by the officers. At the time that the officer fired, what we had is that Heenan had grabbed his arm, and the officer believed that he, with the other hand, was going after the gun.
Okay.
Okay.
They've kind of latched hands, if you will.
Okay.
And as the officer's trying to hold the gun back away from him.
And I, you know, I got, again, have to be clear, cautious here. This is a lot of information out beforehand. The DA has not decided on this, but given some of the conflicting statements that have been emerging out there, given the heightened community interest, and rightfully so, we're erring on the side of trying to provide you with as much information as possible.
If you have additional questions, I'll stay with them. The chief has got another meeting to get to, so. But certainly.
How many shots were fired?
Three.
3 shots.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, if people want to, I'm happy to hang around and provide additional information. So thank you, Chief.
All right. Thank you.